Ancient grains, something everyone seems to want right now. It's a big buzzword, but most people don't actually know much about ancient grains, what makes them different, how to use them in your home, or just overall, what are ancient grains? So we are going to be changing that today. It is time to dive in and do a bit of a crash course into these beloved ancient grains. Hey y'all, welcome back to Grains and Grit. My name is Felicia, and on this channel, I teach you all about real whole grains from a biblical perspective. I really teach you why and how to be milling your own grains and then using it in your kitchens and more. Okay, so ancient grains, you probably have heard the term ancient grains before, especially if you're familiar with the whole gluten-free or even like carnivore, paleo, whatever type of anti-grain in some way circles that may be out there. But the problem is I see a lot of information being floated out about ancient grains that either people clearly don't understand what they are, what it means to be ancient grains, how, and especially not really knowing how to use them in your home. So we're going to be doing an educational crash course. We're going to be doing in this video, basically, what are ancient grains? I'm going to be sharing with y'all some of my favorite ancient grains to be using, and also how to be using ancient grains in your own home. Plus, we're going to do some of my favorite, and that's some myth busting about these ancient grains. Now, this video is actually sponsored by Grand Teton Ancient Grains, who actually happens to be responsible for bringing many of these beloved ancient grains here to the United States, but also they are farmers, they are sixth-generation farmers who use regenerative practices. They are organic farmers in the foothills of the Grand Teton Mountains in Idaho. And we really have them to thank for kind of bringing these ancient grains back alive in many ways, especially one in particular, which we will get to later. They especially are like the only supplier that I know of with one particular ancient grain that is actually extremely hard to find and not as well known, but it is like the ancient of ancient grains. Bottom line, Grand Teton is absolutely amazing because they are so passionate about these ancient grains, keeping them pure, keeping them alive, but also as keeping them as nutritionally dense as possible. And then of course, avoiding all the nasty stuff like your glyphosates, all that crazy stuff. We are banning GMO grains for sure, but they are a wonderful place to go, especially if you love ancient grains, because they pretty much grow and have many of the most common ancient grains that we will find out later in this video. Okay, so first of all, what are ancient grains? Again, this is a term that's thrown out, but many people may not know exactly what they are. What does it mean to be an ancient grain? Now, this is Felicia definition. How I define ancient grains are basically the grains that we've just had for hundreds, if not a few thousand years, basically since humanity came about. And it's just, you know, what we've had for thousands of years. Generally, this is also confirmed by archaeology when archaeologists go in and they're able to find these grains and they say like, oh, this is actually Einkorn or whatever that ancient grain may be. But bottom line is I think most people associate ancient grains with grains that have been around for a very long time. Definitely, I would say pre-industrial revolution, and certainly before our modern dwarf wheat varieties came about, which those only came about like in the 1950s. So also to distinguish ancient grains and modern grains is if you're buying bread in the store, bread at a restaurant, typically speaking, like especially the all-purpose flour in the store, flours and breads now are commonly made with the more modern wheat variety, the ones that were hybridized back in the 1950s. Now, I have no problems with our modern wheat varieties, but of course, I'm all about milling your own grains, and that is the key part, is milling your own grains, whether it's ancient or your modern dwarf wheat. Now, one thing I find interesting that of how ancient grains became popular is basically more in the wheat family, because many times you are consuming an ancient grain that is not in the wheat family. So the ancient grain hype definitely seems to be involved with wheat. People saying you don't need to have our modern wheat, you need to do ancient grains. But it seems to only be this argument in wheat because, believe it or not, ancient grains like rice and corn, those are very, very ancient grains, but no one really states, you know, make sure you get this type of rice. And that probably is because They haven't really been messed with, except corn. Obviously, we have GMO corn, and that's a whole other video right there. But as far as the ancient grains that are most popular in the wheat family, they include ones like Emmer, Einkorn, Spelt, Khorasan, and Rye, which, good news, Grand Teton grows and sells pretty much all of these. And in fact, they're the only ones that I know of right now that actually sell Emmer. I was only aware of Emmer several years ago, and then I was able to get my hands on a small bag and then couldn't find it like ever again. So if you really want to get a hold of Emmer, you need to go to Grand Teton Ancient Grains, because so far they're the only ones I know that have it. Now, as far as a family tree of the ancient grains, and this is not so much of a family tree, more like a history, but bottom line, as far as whoever determines the genetic, I guess geneticist or whoever it was that determines how wheat varieties are related, we basically can see that there was like a common wheat available, and then that came down to like triticale and the grass seeds, and then from triticale we see like einkorn, we have wild einkorn, and also Emmer. So einkorn then was domesticated from the wild einkorn. So wild einkorn can still be found, but it is different than the domesticated one. The domesticated is just easier for farming. And then also there was Emmer. So Emmer and einkorn tend to be like the earliest forms of wheat that we're aware of, but then shortly thereafter, if not pretty much the same time, I mean pretty much the same time, there also was Khorasan and Spelt and Rye. Okay, so now let's get into the actual advantages. Like, are there actual advantages between ancient grains and our modern grains? And ancient grains do have their advantage. One main one that people talk about is the digestibility and gut health of ancient grains. Now, this is kind of a loaded question as far as, oh, just switch to ancient grains and you'll be fine. I do believe that to get the most benefit, you do need to be milling your own grains yourself. But the reason why that people say they are easier to digest is the lower gluten content, or at least the gluten structure is different than our modern wheats. This is a good thing and a bad thing. The good thing is that it has been found that many people are able to digest these ancient grains in the wheat category easier than our modern grains. But the bad news is they're also make them a bit more tricky to work with, especially when it comes to those yeast loaf type breads. And also ancient grains are just less hybridized. I mean, they have hybridization is a natural thing that happens in nature. There's nothing wrong with it. God created plants and animals to hybridize for survival, but the ancient grains are less hybridized, which means that their proteins and starches are closer to their original forms, which kind of resonates with people because they seem to be more gentle. They're kind of just more simple in their genetic code. And I'm not a geneticist, but I have seen arguments with this, like with the chromosomes and things like that. But that is the general thing. And it does make sense if you're going back more to the original source. You know, it's not going to be as convoluted. It is going to be closer to the wheat that God originally created in the Garden of Eden. Now, another advantage that ancient grains have are their nutritional density. Now, ancient grains often have a higher micronutrient content. And I actually did a video about this, comparing modern wheat to our ancient grains. And like, this was one thing that did surprise me, is that studies have shown that ancient grains are a bit more superior in the micronutrients, such as zinc, magnesium, B vitamins, and antioxidants, compared to our modern wheat. Now, ordering these grains from Grand Teton, you get the additional advantage because they are, like I said earlier, with regenerative farming, they are really making sure that the soil is as nutrient dense as possible. So it's crop rotation, taking care of the soil, and also they are organic farmers. So there's no glyphosate or desiccants that are then getting into your grains. So the point is that anyone who's a gardener knows the more nutrient dense your soil is, the more nutrient dense your plant or crop that you're growing from that soil. This is why I love sourcing my wheat berries from these organic regenerative farmers, because not only are they taking care of the environment better for future generations, but we're just getting more benefits, the most nutrients that we possibly can get. And boy, do we need them in this absolutely crazy chemical-filled, polluted world. Now, again, for the biggest benefit, you do need to be milling your grains at home, but good news, Grand Teton is not only a farmer where you can buy wheat berries from, but they are actually a mill as well. So you can actually get milled flour from them. And this is hugely beneficial, especially if you do not have a grain mill yet, which you should be getting if you do want whole grain flour. But they are at least a mill, so you can be trying this out yourself. Another great advantage with ancient grains is more of the flavor and artisan appeal. Many artisan bakers love these ancient grains because they have so many amazing nuances and flavor, and then also how they work. Now again, home millers will notice this difference far more than those if you're just buying the flour, especially if you're buying, like with Einkorn. I do know you can get from other companies where it's more of an all-purpose Einkorn, meaning the bran and germ have been sifted out. Don't do that. You do want the whole grain benefit with that. But with whole grains, with ancient grains, they have all these different flavors that many of us have lost because we're mainly raised on your typical white flour from the store. And so if you love artisan baking, if you like to mix and match these as a home miller, then that is a beauty with these ancient grains to get these flavor profiles out. Plus, each one does a bit different whenever you use it in bread. So they're fun to experiment with. Another great thing about it is it's pretty cool knowing that I'm actually working with a grain that my ancestors used. I mean, many of these are possibly grains that Jesus himself ate, the disciples ate, maybe even served at the Last Supper. And you know, there's something about that that's just pretty cool having that connection. Okay, so how I like to use these ancient grains. Now, do know that I do have recipes on my website, grainsandgrit.com, but Grand Teton also has recipes specifically using these ancient grains. So I highly recommend checking out their recipe section on their website. And again, I'll link it here and I'll link their website in the description box below. But it's really cool that not only can you get these ancient grains that are grown by them, sold by them, milled by them, but they also provide the recipes to help you with these, because ancient grains, they can be tricky, y'all. So first of all, Emmer. Emmer is actually the one grain that I have the least experience with, and that is because, like I said, it is super hard to find. Now that I have a great source through Grand Teton, I definitely plan on using it more to figure out what I like using it best in. So I do believe that Emmer probably will be good for your flatbreads, many different breads like that. Like with many other ancient grains, the gluten structure is not going to probably be high enough to really get a really great loaf of bread, but I suspect it will be great for our quick breads. So that one I can't really give you from experience about, just kind of what I read. So unfortunately, stay tuned to see what else I do with Emmer. Second ancient grain is Spelt. I find that this is probably one of the easiest of the ancient grains to work with. Don't ask me why exactly. It just is. It's just not as tricky of a grain. So if you want to dive into ancient grains, I do actually recommend, if you're a newbie, especially with milling them, that you stick with Spelt. Start with Spelt because it's just easier. Now with Spelt, this is actually the very first grain that I ever had that was freshly milled, 100% freshly milled. It was served to us in pancakes. And maybe that's why I love it the best with pancakes, is because that's how I was introduced. But bottom line is, I love Spelt pancakes. It is so delicious, but pancakes is also an easy recipe to do. Spelt can also be used in waffles and muffins. It generally has a more earthy, nutty taste. Often whenever I smell the wheat berries alone, it's got more of this earthy type smell to it, but it is a lovely ancient grain, and the one that I do recommend the newbies milling with ancient grains to start with. Next ancient grain, Einkorn, probably the most popular of the ancient grains, but I love this as well. Now, this is a tricky one to work with. Einkorn, freshly milled, tends to be more tacky, more sticky. It is harder to read the dough. Not one I recommend for newbies because of that reason. Get some experience with baking with freshly milled grains, and especially bread baking, to understand what you're going for, and then being able to read that dough a bit better with Einkorn. But my favorite recipe to use with Einkorn, I'm actually torn. It is amazing with waffles, but also I love Einkorn with muffins. You know, I think the muffins wins, and that's because something with Einkorn makes the muffins squishy. Like there's these wonderful squishy muffins. I love chocolate chip Einkorn muffins. So same muffin recipe that I have, but I just swap it out for the Einkorn, add in some mini chocolate chips, and Y'all, it's amazing. The only thing is with einkorn, with muffins, I find that you need to up that baking powder just a little bit because it really wants to fall after baking. But even if it does that, y'all, it's okay because it's still good and it's just a muffin. But it's absolutely incredible with yeah, I think muffins might be my favorite with einkorn. Now, next up is probably one of my favorite ancient grains, and that is Khorasan. Now, one thing about Khorasan is you may think, what is Khorasan? You may have heard of kamut. Okay, so here's the thing with kamut versus Khorasan. Kamut is the trademark name for Khorasan. So like we say Kleenex for our tissues, and we just say, grab me a Kleenex. Not every tissue is a Kleenex. Kleenex is the name brand. Same thing with kamut. So Grand Teton grows Khorasan, which is the wheat berries. So it's not kamut that they sell, because with the trademark kamut, they're growing, they have to have very specific ways of growing it and only a certain amount that they're allowed to grow, so on and so forth. So Grand Teton, I think, likes the freedom of just growing the Khorasan with their own standards, which are very high standards, which I'm perfectly fine with. As long as you get Khorasan with an excellent organic farmer who really takes care of the soil and really cares about their grains and their clean grains, Khorasan is just fine, and I'm totally fine getting Khorasan from Grand Teton, not having to go with the name brand like kamut. Now, one thing about Khorasan, favorite way to use that are rolls. Dinner rolls with Khorasan, video up here, you are welcome, because what they do is they basically come out as close to white bread, I think, as you can get as far as rolls go, but 1000% better. They are so soft and fluffy. It's incredible to have a roll from Khorasan. People will not know that it is whole grain. This is 100% freshly milled Khorasan that I use, but it's amazing. It's amazing. Like, check out the recipe. I bring this to potlucks, it will be on my Thanksgiving table this year. I'm filming this before Thanksgiving, so when you see this, it will be just after Thanksgiving. But they are so delicious and everyone loves them. I've never had anyone turn them down. So that is my favorite way to use Khorasan, is in rolls. But like einkorn, it is tricky to work with. It is more sticky. It is more tacky. I find that Khorasan and einkorn are very similar in how they work in dough. So same thing if you use them in muffins, you may want to increase that baking powder just a little bit. But again, if they fall a little bit, it's totally fine because they're muffins and it's still delicious. All right, the fifth grain that people, I think, forget is an ancient grain, but is very popular, and that is rye. Rye is a very popular grain in the wheat family. That is an ancient grain. And of course, with rye, the most popular are your typical rye breads, your dark rye breads like your pumpernickel. Now, these are generally combined with another actual bread wheat. I usually do combine these with a more modern wheat, like a hard white wheat, because rye is not going to get that, super tall loaves and everything. So you do have to combine them if you're wanting your typical rye type breads that are lighter. I mean, you can do 100% rye bread, but it's going to be more dense in my opinion. That's why people add in more of the that type of bread flour, like a hard white or hard red wheat, to get it lighter of a loaf. But rye is wonderful to use. It's actually the best in your sourdough starters. For some reason, sourdough starters love rye. So especially if you, especially when I kickstart my sourdough starter again, say if it's been in the fridge for a while, I really like to use freshly milled rye flour because it loves it. For whatever reason, it loves it very, very much. Highly recommend that. I've also seen people use rye flour in recipes that are surprising, like cookies, and they say it's really, really good. I haven't tried that yet, but that's one place to use it. Now, do know that with rye, whenever you mill it at home, you may notice a slight green tint in a way when you really look at it, and that is from the bran. Just the wheat berries alone, when you look at them, if you look at them closely and especially compare them side by side, they have a little bit of a greenish tint. So kind of a great little nuance with this type of wheat berry to have that different look. All right, my favorite part, myth busting with our ancient grains. Myth number one, ancient grains are not hybridized. They've never been crossbred. They are truly pure in their genetic form and non-GMO. Absolutely true, they are not GMO. Not really true that they've never been hybridized. Many of these ancient grains actually are hybridizations. Even einkorn, like slightly, I would say einkorn might be the one exception along with Emmer that hasn't been really hybridized. We just domesticated them. So we domesticated from the wild einkorn to the domesticated einkorn. And honestly, I don't know how you can do that without doing some sort of crossbreeding hybridization. But with those, that tends to be true. With other ones, whether it's Khorasan or Spelt or Rye, they actually are hybridized. Like I said, back up in that family tree, you had your common wheat, your triticum, your goat grass, and then several of these wheats are the hybridization of triticum and goat grass. So they technically are hybridized. Again, hybridization is not bad. It's just no one worries about your cows or your apples or bananas being hybridized. Okay, it happens. It's how something survives. It's God created hybridization. So that part is not entirely true. They are more pure in their genetic line. They haven't hybridized as much as, say, our modern grains have, but they technically are hybridization. But they are not genetically modified. And as I've been mentioned before, that Grand Teton is all about keeping these beloved ancient grains pure in their genetic line. And actually, they have a non-GMO seed program that is in-house to ensure that their seed is maintained and protected, a very important part of keeping these ancient grains alive and preserved for our future generations. Myth number 2 is that they are gluten-free, or I have issues with gluten, but I can have ancient grains, so on and so forth. Okay, so there are gluten-free ancient grains. Corn is gluten-free, rice is gluten-free, but the wheat family is not gluten-free, whether it is Khorasan and einkorn or on modern wheat. They all have gluten in them. Now, the gluten structure is different with each one, and it is different than our modern wheats. That is true. But if you truly are having issues with gluten, like if you are a true celiac, you will not be able to have any sort of wheat, whether it is ancient grains or not. Now, I have my theories, a video coming soon that I plan on doing about the whole it's not the gluten you're reacting to thing. That's coming soon because there's more to it. And another thing is the ancient grains alone are not some miracle cure, okay? I do believe that if you mill wheat yourself, many people who are unable to handle bread from the store, white flour, things like that, usually when they just switch over to milling their grains from home, whether it is modern or ancient grains, they're usually fine. The bottom line is you need to have these whole grains. And again, Grand Teton, they sell the wheat berries to you, but they are also a mill. So if you're unsure, or maybe you don't have a grain mill yet, but you would like to try these, you can actually buy these grains in the whole grain form. They mill them for you. They don't sift. So they're coming to you in whole grain form. But the best benefit is milling them yourself to make sure you're getting as many of the nutrients as possible and that you're keeping things from going from oxidizing. So that is basically the crash course of these beloved ancient grains. And I really hope that this is helpful for y'all. Do know that many of these beloved ancient grains are found at Grand Teton Ancient Grains. And I highly recommend that you try them out because again, these are some of the cleanest grains I've received. They are shipped straight to your home and you can get them in various sizes. So you can get small quantity or you can get the big buckets like I do. So thank you so much to Grand Teton for sponsoring this video. Just go to grainsandgrit.com/Teton and use this coupon code. I believe it does expire January 1st of 2026. So you're going to want to get on this soon, but be sure to check them out. Tell them I sent y'all. And like I said, if you want to get my favorite recipe using these ancient grains, and that is these Khorasan rolls, you're going to want to check this video out here. And as always, I hope y'all have a wonderful day and I'll see you next week.